Axton Betz-Hamilton was born in Indiana and grew up on her family's farm in the small town of Portland. It wasn't until she was away at college and opening accounts of her own that she realized something was awry.
I was 19 when I found out that my identity had been stolen, and I found that out when the electric company said I needed to pay a $100 deposit due to my credit score when I tried to get electric service at my first apartment. And I got a copy of my credit report thinking, oh, it's because I don't have credit, and found out that my credit report was 10 pages long, and it was full of credit card entries that had been defaulted on and collection agency entries.
Delving deeper into her credit history, Betz-Hamilton discovered that her identity had been stolen when she was just a child, and the thief had racked up a staggering $500,000 in credit card debt. Learning that someone has stolen several thousands of dollars in your name is a stressful ordeal, and sadly, it happens all the time. The Federal Trade Commission estimates that as many as 9 million Americans fall victim to identity theft each year. For Betz-Hamilton, however, her story is unlike many others. It all began back on the family farm where she was raised.
Growing up, we lived on my grandfather's farm. My grandfather had a 100-acre farm. He did not farm it, and my parents actually stayed on the farm to help take care of my grandmother when she was sick with cancer, and she passed away when I was born, or before I was born, I should say, and my parents stayed there to help Grandpa, and we lived in a mobile home on his farm, and, it was great. We had animals, and Grandpa lived next door. He was a very involved grandpa.
After her grandpa passed away when she was 11 years old, she noticed a shift in her mom, Pamela.
My grandfather that I'm referring to was my mom's dad. And after he died, there was a period of time where she just stayed on the couch and bought things off of the Home Shopping Network and QVC. And everything that she was buying that I could see was costume jewelry. And it finally got to the point where I said something to Dad about it. Dad, of course, was out in the barn. He was always taking care of the animals. And I went out in the barn, of course, and Mom was still on the couch, and said something to the effect of, Dad, Mom's spending an awful lot of money on jewelry on TV. And, even at 11, I knew what Mom was doing was excessive. And so I know Dad had a conversation with her, and the flow of jewelry stopped. But I thought that was just a part of grieving.
Betz-Hamilton says this was around the time that the flow of mail to their house slowly started to cease. Magazines, letters, and other pieces of mail all stopped coming, despite confirmation of them being sent to the home's address.
I would get mad at my friends, for not writing me, even though they said they were. And it was around that time Mom said people were stealing our mail because they had stolen our identities. And our identities meant Mom and Dad. And it progressed from there. So we had issues with utilities being shut off for non-payment, even though they were paid. At least that's what Dad thought. And we had issues with credit cards being taken out in my parents' names. But I didn't know I was a victim back then, because back then nobody knew what child identity theft was. Back then, nobody really even knew what identity theft was.
It can be hard to believe that many people were unfamiliar with identity theft until so recently. But Betz-Hamilton says that back in the 90s, it was easier to say she was poor than to explain to her friends why exactly her home phone line was disconnected.
High school kids aren't going to understand identity theft, especially back then. But where I'm from, not having enough money, that's something that a lot of people can identify with. And so it was easier to explain it that way. It was more acceptable socially. It was more acceptable that way than to try and explain it for what it really was.
And she says that at that age it was hard to understand herself what was fully going on. It was before the age of widespread internet access, and her mom was the coined money expert in the family with a background in finance.
Mom was planting seeds of suspicion in our minds as to who might be behind the identity theft, such as extended family, friends of the family. We really didn't have people over, so nobody knew what the inside of the house looked like. The inside of the house was extremely dated. It had not been updated since the late 70s when my grandmother redecorated it. And Mom was not the best housekeeper. And so there was a huge contrast between what people saw driving by the farm on the outside versus what the house looked like on the inside.
Betz-Hamilton says during this time her dad may have been in denial while he filled his days with work. He was either at his full-time job as a department manager at a local grocery store or outside tending to the family's farm. Coupled with her mom's own paranoia, Betz-Hamilton says her teenage years were filled with isolation and secrecy.
Mom would say things like, you have to keep the drapes closed. I'm home in the summertime, 16, 17 years old. Can't open the front drapes. Can't open the front drapes. Don't open the drapes in your bedroom. And I would ask why. And she said, well, there are people who drive up and down the highway, and we lived on a highway. There are people who drive up and down the highway looking to snatch teenagers. So, I would have to stay in the house with the blinds drawn. I was not allowed to answer the door, even if I knew who it was, because Mom convinced me, and Dad as well, that outside, the walls of that house, everyone was out to get us.
Betz-Hamilton left her childhood home for college after graduating from high school. She still kept in touch with her parents, but the family's identity theft problems still remained unsolved. It wasn't until her early 30s that she started to get some answers once her mom passed away from a rare form of leukemia.
From February 12th to February 25th, I think Dad and I were going through a pretty normal grieving process. And then on February 25th, Dad called me from an outbuilding on our property. And, of course, by this point, they had moved from the farm that I grew up on to a different farm. And Dad called me, and he was just furious with me for running a credit card over limit in 2001. And I said, Dad, I didn't. What are you talking about? And he said, don't lie to me. I have the credit card statement in my hand. And I said, what credit card statement is it? And he said, well, it's First USA. And I said, Dad, that was one of the credit cards that was taken out in my name as part of the identity theft. What's Mom doing with that? And he said, well, I don't know, but it's out here in the outbuilding in a file folder with your birth certificate. My blood ran cold because I had my birth certificate. And there's no logical reason for a birth certificate and a credit card statement to be in the same file unless you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing.
For almost a decade, her mother, Pamela, had been opening accounts in her daughter's name and running up charges. And it didn't stop there.
She said her identity was stolen, but hers was never stolen. She destroyed her credit and then destroyed Dad's and then destroyed mine and then destroyed my grandfather's, so her father-in-law, my dad's dad. And I think she got away with it for so long because she worked in the financial services industry. She knew the rules, she knew the laws, she knew the regulations, she knew how far she could push the envelope and not get caught.
Today, Betz-Hamilton is in good financial standing with her credit, but it wasn't an easy road back.
Identity theft is a crime where you are presumed guilty until you can prove yourself innocent, because banks and utility companies and different agencies who need your Social Security number and name, they look at you, that's your name, your Social Security number, therefore it's you. They don't want to listen to your story of identity theft. And in part because people will falsely claim they've been identity theft victims to get out paying their bills.
Betz-Hamilton spent years disputing the fraudulent entries with collection agencies to get her credit reports cleared. For some, she was successful, but for others, she had to wait the full 7 years for the negative account information to drop off the report. After years of fighting this battle to regain her identity, she's now made a career helping others who are in similar situations.
I was so frustrated with being looked at like I was guilty all the time and not being heard that I thought, well, maybe I can be part of the solution. And I went on to graduate school, did my master's research on identity theft, and then went on to earn my doctorate at Iowa State University, where my dissertation focused on the experiences of adult child identity theft victims. And adult child identity theft victims are those who were victimized under the age of 18, but didn't learn about it until they were 18 or older.
In addition to helping identity theft victims, Betz-Hamilton has also recently published a book about her story titled The Less People Know About Us, a mystery of betrayal, family secrets, and stolen identity. To find out more about the book, this topic, and get tips on how to protect yourself from identity theft, visit viewpointsradio.org. For more behind the scenes, follow us on Instagram and Twitter @ViewpointsRadio. And subscribe and listen to our show anytime, wherever you listen to podcasts. This segment is written and produced by Amira Zaveri. I'm Gary Price.
About 27 million people in the United States have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. COPD is treatable, yet half of flare-ups are never reported to physicians, suggesting that patients are not seeking appropriate care. There are 1.2 million COPD hospital admissions each year, and 1 in 4 patients hospitalized for a COPD flare-up die within a year. Dr. David Menino is a respiratory medical expert at GSK.
It is important to act before COPD progresses. Flare-up should be treated early on before the condition worsens. Having one COPD flare-up increases the risk of having another, and studies have shown each flare-up can cause more lung damage. You don't have to settle with symptoms that interfere with your daily routine. If you continue to experience COPD symptoms, speak with your doctor about what more can be done to manage them.
Dr. Menino says studies demonstrate that early treatment brings improvement in lung function, breathlessness, and quality of life. Find out more at COPD.com.
It's National Alzheimer's Disease Awareness Month, as well as National Family Caregivers Month. The two go together since there are more than 16 million families and friends in the U.S. caring for someone with Alzheimer's. According to the Alzheimer's Association, 4 out of 5 caregivers say they'd like more support in providing care, especially from their families, yet 39% haven't engaged others in caregiving tasks. Ruth Drew, Director of Information and Support Services for the Alzheimer's Association, has suggestions on ways to help.
Make a standing appointment to give the caregiver a break so they can run errands or go to a support group. Caregivers often feel isolated or alone, so check in with a phone call or stop by for a visit. And when you offer support, be specific. Say, I'm going to the store, what do you need, rather than call me if you need anything.
People overwhelmingly agree caregiving for someone with Alzheimer's should be a group effort. Find more tips and resources for caregivers at alz.org.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Viewpoints is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows. And find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.
Coming up on Viewpoints.
It was a dreadful disease, a hemorrhagic fever, that killed quite gruesomely.
The illnesses workers faced while building the Panama Canal. Then,
there's a lot of things that we can learn in this country that are different overseas.
The importance of keeping a global perspective on learning. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.